like, most of the time it's the troubled students, or students that know for sure that of their focus, that they would go talk to a counselor. Whereas none of the students are gonna fall through the cracks. They all get an opportunity to speak with a counselor, kind of. And I think that's really awesome and really promising. And I know I've worked with students who love animals and they wanna be a vet, but they hate math and science. And or even as a parent, your kid tells you they wanna do this and you kinda don't wanna tell them they can't, so it'd be really awesome that they can learn from, not that I wanna, of course, put my responsibilities on my computer, but it does help. It certainly does help, them to learn on their own instead of somebody telling them, yeah, no, you probably can't do that. They kind of learn that on their own through a tool like this, so it's really cool.
I like the way that even just what's listed there has those layers in a very positive way. They kind of describe what you would do in a very interesting way. Transform vehicles from dull drab pieces of metal into pieces of art. So, you wouldn't think of that as an adult or parent, but that really is what it is. If you're into painting cars, that's what it is for them.
And I like it shows you, you can do it with a high school degree, you can do it with a college, or 2-year college or technical training, or university. So I like the technical.
And the next thing, in our community, we probably have people who could mentor students in every single one of these careers that they could come up with if we just knew, what their interest was, because there's a variety of people who could probably step forward and do that.
Or on the flip side of that, it introduces students to career options that they might not have exposure to here.
Well, that is a great presentation. Thank you. We're moving to the board open discussion.
I heard something kind of disturbing that I wanted to see if anybody else had heard. I went to part of the advocacy and action improvement team when we had our board meeting. But somebody was mentioning a 2 to 10% cut this year, this fiscal year.
I heard last week when I was in Topeka that some of our legislative leaders have asked the State Department for information about what a 2% cut would look like, what kind of effect that could have on K-12. I think the state is in a real precarious situation with their finances. The governor proposed a budget that hasn't been incredibly well received among many legislators. I think there's a lot of belief that it relies on a lot of one-time fixes that continue to just kind of kick the problem down the road. And it seems from a lot of the preliminary conversation that the legislature may no longer be willing to support that approach. And so I think they are going to be looking at a variety of options. In that proposal was securitizing the tobacco fund settlement, which I want to say $30 to $50 million of that annuity that comes from that each year goes to early childhood programs. It would certainly eliminate a source of revenue to the state budget that right now is going to be there for the next 20 to 30 years. One of the things that was recommended was delaying payments to capers. You might remember a few years ago, all capers covered employees, their contributions went from 4% out of their check to 6%. And the intention of that was for the employees to have a role in helping stabilize the caper system, the long-term outlook. The state was also supposed to be increasing as their obligation in this. So making those kind of decisions would certainly lengthen the amount of time that's going to be necessary before CAPERS would be in a better long-term financial position. Wouldn't affect current benefits, wouldn't affect retirees at this point, but I think the legislators, many of them, are scrutinizing some of those suggestions, and there were other suggestions. There were suggestions about raising the taxes on tobacco and alcohol, and there were a number of different approaches. But I think there's going to be discussion in Topeka if those things can't happen or aren't in their minds the best choices. There may be some cuts, and those may affect state agencies and could affect K-12. We'll keep you posted as we hear more about that. Certainly, mid-year cuts are not easy for anybody to deal with. And the farther into the budget year we get, the more difficult they are to deal with. I think it's going to be a difficult legislative session up there this year for folks because we're in that bad of a spot. The state is not in a good spot financially.
Well, our federal funding could change as well, depending on what President-elect Trump does too, vouchers, et cetera. So, we could get a cut on both sides of the federal landscape, so.
Some of our federal funds are already going down a little bit, not huge amounts, but some of our title funding is dropping just as a result of other changes at the federal government without the significant change in administration. So,
Thank goodness only 9% of our budget's federal funding, but who knows?
I believe her hearing is Wednesday. The Secretary of Education's hearing is Wednesday.
Okay. Hello?
I also attended the KSB advocacy meeting and had a chance to sit in on the education committee hearing and spoke with Senator Dahl, and the same. It's just very uncertain right now and not particularly positive, so.
I think we are fortunate that Senator Dahl is the vice chair of the Senate Education Committee. Representative Jennings, while not on the Education Committee, I think he's on the committee that addresses pension issues. One of the things that we are hoping there's going to be some change with are the working after retirement requirements and options under CAPERS. We have a number of employees who have exercised that option, and here in the last couple of years, the legislation that's been passed has been making that increasingly difficult. And in the part of the world where we're feeling that teacher shortage firsthand on a daily basis, legislation or laws that limit the options for people to qualified teachers to work if they've chosen to retire are really difficult for us to deal with, because we certainly want those people to be able to work for us and not work in Oklahoma or Colorado or worse yet, work at Walmart or Home Depot, and then we compete with Oklahoma and Colorado for the new teachers that are still available. And so these qualified educators, we want to keep them in the profession as long as possible. So I'm hopeful that there will be some changes there that'll expand some opportunities for those people, as well as for Mr. Hogan and his team, as they're looking for quality teachers to fill some of our spots.
Along those lines, on the consent agenda, we had the contract that was on there. And I think it's kind of wild to see they come back and just because they have a rap sheet, so to speak, in the past, we have to pay that keeper's contribution. And I think that's just wild. And I think that's probably an example of some of the piecemealing in there that the legislature has put in to try to sort of make sure they get certain revenues from a certain number of positions in a certain number of school districts. But it's still kind of wild to think that we try to hire somebody as a contractor and then we're just sort of automatically having to look at the past and because of history, pay the capers.
And Mark, you're exactly right in that if we're hiring, whether it's as an employee or through contract, some type of a third-party contractor relationship, if that person's a capers retiree, then there's a different set of rules that apply to them that we have to deal with. I owe you an apology. I told you Friday in my notes to you that we were gonna have a contract on the agenda and we neglected to get it on there. So if you were looking for it, it was supposed to be on there, but I didn't get it put on there for you. So it'll be on there next time, but the issue, and Mark and I talked about that issue, is that because this person was a capers retiree, we're going, an element of that contract is gonna be that capers surcharge has to be paid. And,
Even though we have no other obligations of any kind, because that's a contractor,
right,
here's this thing that sort of comes out of left field and says, yeah, but in this regard, you gotta treat him as an employee.
right. And that's an example of some of what's happened over the last few years with how this working after retirement thing, which could be relatively simple, has gotten immensely complicated. To put it in Dale Dennis's words, 2 years ago, we had 13 categories of employees under that working after retirement. In that was, or I'm sorry, 10 categories. That was how that was all developed. We had a committee work on it last year, and we changed it to simplify it, and now we have 13 categories. We can't stand much more success. And so I think there is going to be an effort in the legislature to try to address that, and hopefully those kind of things can be addressed. We want capers to be solvent. We certainly understand that has to be a priority, but we have a lot of qualified retirees who could be coming back and working in some capacity. And right now the system not only doesn't encourage that, it discourages it. And we're not in a position that we want to discourage any qualified employees from returning to work, in my opinion.
Particularly on those positions that are in demand in health services and a lot of different areas, almost anywhere in the world. And we're trying to secure those services out here, and that becomes an impediment.
Well, I would also like to thank Health Services staff for the goodie bags that we got here. So I'm sure everybody appreciated it. And I was wondering if we had an update on Mr. Brunel.
The last update I got was he had won a trip to Jamaica, and he was $1,200 behind the leader, and that was at 6:50, so there was still 10 minutes to go in the show. And I didn't get a final update, so you're gonna have to
He got
watch.
second, and he won $8 grand.
Wow. Well, congratulations, Mr. Brunel. Good for you. Another way of putting Garden City on the map, right? That's great.
I didn't see that recommended on his clear career cluster path.
He did say
To be a game show contestant.
Well, it looks like our next board meeting will be on Monday, February 6th at 6 p.m. in this room. And is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, motion carried. Thank you.
Hey, I should have shared this in the open comment time, but Mrs. Cobble was not here tonight.